The Moon Temple had never witnessed a gathering so magnificent. Silver banners bearing the crests of the 7 great packs fluttered beneath the open dome. Thousands of wolves filled the marble sanctuary. Alpha Kings, Lunas, elders, warriors. Every seat was occupied for one historic moment. Alpha King Adrian Nightbane would finally claim his fated mate. At the center of the sacred hall stood Evelyn Frost. Moonlight streamed through the crystal ceiling, bathing her white ceremonial gown in a gentle glow. For 3 years she had stood beside Adrian. She had healed wounded soldiers after bloody battles. She had negotiated peace when rival packs threatened war. She had spent countless sleepless nights helping rebuild villages destroyed by conflict. The people already treated her like their queen. Today was simply meant to make it official. The high priest stepped forward, carrying the ancient moonstone. Its silver light shimmered across the temple. "Alpha King Adrian Nightbane," he proclaimed, "the moon goddess calls upon you to complete the sacred bond." A hopeful silence settled over the crowd. Evelyn lifted her eyes to Adrian. He did not smile. Instead, he took one slow step backwards. Gasps echoed around the temple. His voice rang through the sacred chamber. "I reject Evelyn Frost." The words struck harder than thunder. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then whispers spread through the gathering like wildfire. Did he say reject? Before the moon altar? Impossible. Adrian kept his eyes fixed ahead. "Our kingdom requires an alliance with the Iron Fang Pack. My personal feelings cannot outweigh my duty." As though summoned by those words, Lady Cassandra stepped gracefully from among the Iron Fang delegation. The Chancellor's daughter wore a satisfied smile that reached her eyes. Several nobles applauded cautiously. Most remained frozen in disbelief. Evelyn felt as though the air had vanished from her lungs. 3 years, every sacrifice, every promise beneath the stars, reduced to a political calculation, yet her face remained calm. She refused to let them see her break. Slowly, she unclasped the silver mate bracelet Adrian had placed upon her wrist years before. She walked to the moon altar, carefully laid it beside the glowing moonstone. Then she turned toward Adrian. "I hope your queen brings your kingdom everything you believe I could not." There was no anger in her voice, only quiet heartbreak. Without waiting for a reply, Evelyn turned away. The crowd instinctively parted before her. Not one person dared stop her. She had almost reached the great bronze doors when the entire temple trembled. A deafening boom echoed through the sanctuary. The doors burst inward. A freezing northern wind swept across the marble floor, extinguishing hundreds of candles. Ancient wolf instincts awakened inside every alpha present. Without thinking, they lowered their heads. Even seasoned warriors stepped backwards. One figure emerged from the swirling mist. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a black cloak trimmed with silver fur. His piercing silver eyes found Evelyn instantly. The air itself seemed to grow heavier. Someone whispered in terror. "The Lycan King." Kaelin Dreadmore stopped only a few paces from Evelyn. His ancient wolf rumbled deep within his chest. Then the legendary ruler spoke one quiet word: "Mine." The temple fell into stunned silence, as destiny rewrote itself before the eyes of an entire kingdom. Silence consumed the moon temple. No one dared whisper. No one dared move. The single word spoken by Lycan King Kaelin Dreadmore seemed to linger beneath the ancient dome long after it left his lips. "Mine." Every alpha in the sanctuary lowered their gaze, not because Kaelin demanded it, because his presence alone awakened instincts older than memory. The high priest clutched the glowing moonstone with trembling hands. Your Majesty," he stammered, "the Alpha King has already rejected her." Kaelin never looked away from Evelyn. "I know." His voice was calm, steady. Without another word, he walked across the polished marble floor. Each measured step echoed through the temple. The crowd instinctively moved aside. No warrior blocked his path. No elder questioned his approach. Even Adrian remained rooted where he stood, unable to explain why he suddenly felt like an ordinary wolf before an ancient force. Evelyn watched Kaelin carefully. She had expected anger, possession, perhaps another command from another powerful ruler. Instead, when he stopped before her, he left enough space that she would never feel cornered. Then something happened that no living soul had ever witnessed. The legendary Lycan king lowered his head. A respectful bow, not to another monarch, not to a goddess, to her. A collective gasp swept through the temple. The Lycan king bowed. Impossible. The chronicles say they kneel before no one. Kaelin slowly lifted his eyes to meet hers. My wolf has searched for you for 25 years. His silver eyes held neither pride nor demand. From the moment he awakened, he believed someone was missing. I never understood why. He smiled faintly. Now I do. Evelyn's heart pounded. She had never met this man before today. Yet there was no fear in the way he looked at her, only quiet certainty. Kaelin drew a slow breath. But whether you come with me, he paused, will always be your choice. The words rippled through the crowd like a second earthquake. Lady Cassandra frowned. What choice? She's his mate. One elder immediately shook his head. No, a Lycan bond cannot be forced. Another whispered in disbelief. Not even by the king himself. Kaelin turned his attention briefly toward the gathering. I will never ask destiny to become an excuse for stealing someone's freedom. Then he looked back at Evelyn. If you wish to remain here, I will leave. If you wish to walk away alone, I will respect that. And if one day you wish to know why fate brought us together, my doors will always remain open. He took one step backward, giving her even more space. For the first time, since Adrian had rejected her, Evelyn felt something unexpected. She did not feel trapped. She did not feel chosen because she was useful. She did not feel like a prize to be claimed. She simply felt seen. Tears blurred her vision. Not because another king wanted her, but because this one had given her something no one else ever had. The freedom to decide her own future. And throughout the Moon Temple, every witness understood they were watching something far more extraordinary than the awakening of an ancient mate bond. They were watching the birth of a love that began not with possession, but with a choice. No one left the Moon Temple. The ceremony had become something far greater than a rejected mate bond. It had become a mystery. The high priest looked from Evelyn to Kaelin, then toward the circle of ancient elders. What is happening? He whispered. Before anyone could answer, the oldest oracle rose slowly from her seat. She leaned heavily upon a carved white staff worn smooth by centuries. Across her back rested a narrow wooden case sealed with faded silver wax. Several elders gasped. The first moon seal, the oracle nodded. It has remained unopened for 26 years. She stepped toward the altar. The entire temple watched in silence. With careful hands, she broke the ancient seal. Inside lay a single scroll wrapped in white silk. The parchment looked older than anyone present. Its edges shimmered faintly beneath the moonstone's light. The oracle unrolled it. Her weathered eyes scanned the faded writing. Then she lifted her voice. 26 years ago, the Moon Crown dynasty fell. A murmur spread through the crowd. Every child knew the story. The royal family had supposedly perished during the night of crimson flames. The oracle slowly shook her head. That was not the truth. She looked directly at Evelyn. The youngest princess survived. The temple erupted. Impossible. There were no survivors. The bloodline ended. The oracle struck her staff against the marble floor. Silence returned. The infant princess was carried away by loyal guardians before the palace burned. She was hidden among ordinary wolves. Raised under another name, so that those hunting the royal bloodline would never find her. Evelyn stared at the elderly woman. I don't understand. You will. The oracle approached her. Show me your left shoulder. Confused, Evelyn loosened the collar of her ceremonial gown. Just above her collarbone rested a pale silver mark, shaped like a crescent moon, surrounded by tiny stars. The oracle smiled sadly. The moon-crown birthmark. She turned toward the gathering. The symbol carried only by the heirs of the First Moon Kingdom. Every eye fixed upon Evelyn. Even Adrian looked stunned. Kalen remained silent, though something ancient flickered inside his silver eyes. The oracle continued. Long before wolves and Lycans became separate kingdoms, they were ruled by one royal family. The Moon Crown united both peoples. When the dynasty was attacked, the surviving heirs were separated. One line disappeared into the northern Lycan Empire. The other vanished among the wolf packs. She looked back at Evelyn. You are the last heir. A heavy silence settled over the temple. Then another elder stepped forward. There is more. He held up several faded letters. For years, members of the royal council searched for the lost princess. They found clues. They suspected Evelyn, but they needed proof. Adrian frowned. What does that have to do with my rejection? The elder's expression darkened. Everything. If Evelyn became queen, her true identity might be discovered. So certain counselors manipulated you. They encouraged the alliance with Iron Fang. They ensured you rejected her publicly. They planned for the last royal heir to disappear quietly before the truth could awaken. Evelyn's breath caught. Her heartbreak had never been an accident. Before she was even born, powerful men had already begun deciding the life they intended to steal from her. 3 days after the revelation in the Moon Temple, Evelyn crossed the northern border into the Lycan Empire. Snow-covered mountains stretched toward the clouds. Ancient forests shimmered beneath blankets of silver frost. The empire felt different from the wolf kingdoms. Quieter, older. Its people watched respectfully as their king escorted the lost heir of the Moon Crown dynasty through the capital. Many expected Kalen to bring her directly into the royal palace. Instead, Evelyn stopped her horse before the towering gates. She turned toward him. I have one condition. Kalen smiled faintly. I suspected you would. She met his silver eyes. I won't leave one kingdom only to become someone else's possession. I won't move into a palace simply because fate says I belong there. If I stay, I'll choose my own path. Several Lycan nobles exchanged nervous glances. No one had ever spoken to their king so directly. Kalen's expression softened. I was hoping you'd say exactly that. He looked toward the palace. Then the palace will wait. The words surprised everyone. Within the hour, arrangements were made for Evelyn to live inside the Imperial Healing Academy instead. The academy stood beside a peaceful lake surrounded by white birch trees. It had existed for centuries, preserving ancient knowledge gathered by wolves and Lycans alike. Its libraries contained forgotten medical texts. Its gardens overflowed with rare healing herbs. For Evelyn, it felt like home. She threw herself into her studies. Each morning, she learned forgotten remedies from elderly Lycan healers. Each afternoon, she treated injured soldiers, elderly villagers, and orphaned children. She never asked whether a patient was Lycan or werewolf. Pain spoke the same language in every heart. The academy flourished beneath her gentle care. Weeks became months. Kalen visited often. Sometimes he arrived carrying old medical books rescued from abandoned monasteries. I thought these might interest you, he would say. Other days he brought nothing more than warm tea from the northern mountains. Occasionally, he simply sat beside the lake while Evelyn organized herbs or wrote notes inside her journal. Hours passed without conversation. Neither of them found the silence uncomfortable. It became its own kind of understanding. One evening, as the first snowflakes drifted across the academy gardens, Evelyn looked up from grinding medicinal roots. You've never asked about the mate bond. Kalen carefully set down 2 steaming cups of tea. No. Why? He looked across the frozen lake. Because if the only reason you stayed was fate, then I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether your heart ever truly arrived. She studied him quietly. So you're willing to wait? For as long as it takes. And if that day never comes? A gentle smile touched his face. Then I'll be grateful I had the chance to know the remarkable woman who rebuilt hope after losing everything. Something warm stirred inside Evelyn's heart. Not the overwhelming pull of destiny. Something quieter, safer, trust. For the first time in her life, she discovered what love could become when it asked for nothing, demanded nothing, and allowed freedom to bloom before affection ever took root. Winter settled over the wolf kingdoms. Snow covered the palace rooftops, where Evelyn had once walked beside Adrian. The halls felt strangely empty, not because servants had left, because laughter had. For weeks, Alpha King Adrian Nightbane could not silence the oracle's words. The rejection had never been about politics. It had been a conspiracy. At first, he refused to believe it. Then he began asking questions. He dismissed the advisors who had insisted upon the alliance with Iron Fang. He ordered the royal archives reopened. Every sealed letter, every council record, every military report from the past 3 years was brought before him. The deeper he searched, the more disturbing the truth became. Several reports warning of corruption had vanished. Letters from Evelyn requesting investigations had never reached his desk. Trade records had been altered. Council minutes had been rewritten after meetings ended. Someone had carefully controlled everything he saw. Late one evening, Captain Rowan entered the king's study, carrying a weathered leather satchel. "My king," he said quietly, "we found this hidden beneath the chancellor's residence." Inside were dozens of letters. Adrian unfolded the first. His hands began to shake. One message read, "The king must believe Lady Evelyn supports the political marriage. Keep him isolated from her whenever possible." Another ordered servants to delay Evelyn whenever she requested private meetings with Adrian. A third instructed counselors to praise Lady Cassandra while quietly questioning Evelyn's loyalty. It was all there, every lie, every deception, every thread that had led to the moment inside the Moon Temple. Adrian lowered the letters onto his desk. He remembered every time Evelyn had asked to speak with him, every conversation postponed, every warning dismissed because trusted advisors insisted she misunderstood politics. He had believed strangers, not the woman who had never once lied to him. His greatest failure had begun long before the rejection. It had begun the day he stopped listening. Within days, every surviving conspirator was arrested. The chancellor confessed to manipulating the council. Iron Fang officials admitted they had accepted bribes. The alliance itself had been built upon falsehoods. Yet exposing the truth brought Adrian no peace. Some wounds could not be repaired by justice. He saddled his own horse before dawn. "No guards," he ordered. "No royal escort." Captain Rowan frowned. "Where are you going, Your Majesty?" "The Lycan Empire." "To bring Lady Evelyn home?" Adrian slowly shook his head. "No. I surrendered that right the day I rejected her." Several days later, he arrived at the Imperial Healing Academy. Snow drifted gently across the gardens. He found Evelyn kneeling beside an elderly Lycan, carefully changing the bandages around the man's injured arm. She looked up as Adrian approached. Surprise crossed her face. Then calm returned. When the patient smiled and walked away, Adrian stepped forward. "I know the truth now," he said softly. "I failed you before I ever rejected you. I stopped listening to the one person who never lied to me." Silence lingered between them. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "I forgive you, Adrian." Hope flickered across his face. Then she continued gently, "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." Adrian bowed his head. This time, he accepted her words without argument. Because love could survive hardship, but it could never survive the loss of trust once it had been willingly abandoned. Spring arrived with the grand summit. For the first time in centuries, wolves and Lycans gathered beneath one banner instead of facing one another across a battlefield. The summit took place inside the restored hall of the First Moon Kingdom. Its white stone columns had survived countless wars. Now they welcomed peace. Alpha Kings, Lycan generals, elders, healers, village leaders. Every corner of the united hall overflowed with hope. At the center sat Evelyn, not upon a throne, but beside Kaelin at a round council table. Neither ruler stood above the other. They listened more than they spoke. Many believed the old divisions between wolves and Lycans were finally ending. Not everyone shared that dream. Hidden among the crowd, the last conspirators waited. They had lost their titles, their wealth, their influence. If Evelyn lived, the Moon Crown dynasty would unite both kingdoms forever. They could not allow that. As the summit reached its conclusion, one traitor slipped from the gathering. A poisoned dagger flashed beneath his cloak. He lunged toward Evelyn. "Die with your bloodline!" The warning came too late. Before the blade reached her, Kaelin stepped between them. Steel met steel. The assassin's dagger crashed against Kaelin's drawn sword. At the same instant, Lycan guards and wolf warriors surrounded the attackers. More conspirators emerged from hidden corners of the hall. Arrows flew. Swords clashed. The ancient chamber echoed with battle once more. Evelyn refused to hide. She guided frightened civilians towards safety and treated the wounded as the fighting continued around her. Within moments, Adrian joined Kaelin. Back to back, the Alpha King and the Lycan King fought together against the enemies who had manipulated them both. Before sunset, the battle was over. The surviving traitors were dragged away in chains. The hall of the First Moon Kingdom stood scarred. But it still stood. As healers tended the injured, Kaelin quietly disappeared. Several minutes later, he returned carrying a small velvet box. The murmurs spread instantly. Everyone watched as the legendary Lycan King crossed the hall. He stopped before Evelyn. Then, before every Alpha, every Lycan, every elder, and every citizen, Kaelin lowered himself onto one knee. A stunned silence swept through the chamber. He opened the box. Inside rested the ancient moon crown ring. Its silver stone shimmered beneath the evening light. Kaelin looked up at Evelyn. "My wolf called you mine the moment we met." His voice was steady, but my heart has learned something wiser. A gentle smile touched his lips. "You are not mine unless you freely choose to be." He held the ring toward her. "Will you stand beside me? As my queen, as my equal, as the woman whose answer matters more to me than my crown." Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes. Not because of the ring, not because every kingdom was watching, but because, for the first time in her life, someone with the power to command had chosen instead to ask. Around them, the great hall became perfectly still. Kings held their breath. Warriors lowered their weapons. Even Adrian watched quietly. The fate of two worlds now rested in the answer of one woman whose voice would finally decide her own destiny. The Grand Summit Hall remained silent. Hundreds of eyes rested upon Evelyn. The ancient moon crown ring shimmered in Kaelin's outstretched hand. Yet he did not move. He did not urge. He simply waited. His knee remained upon the stone floor, his silver eyes filled not with expectation, but with quiet hope. Evelyn looked at the ring, then at the legendary king before her. A few months earlier, she had stood in another sacred hall. Another powerful man had made a decision about her future, without asking what she wanted. This moment was different. Entirely different. Slowly, she reached for the ring. A murmur swept through the gathering. But instead of placing it on her finger, she held it gently in her palm. "I have one question." Kaelin nodded. "Anything." Her voice was soft enough that everyone leaned forward to hear. "If the moon goddess had never made us mates." She paused. If there had been no ancient bond, no prophecy, no destiny, would you still have walked into that temple for me? Silence answered her. Kaelin never looked away. I walked into that temple because my wolf found you. A faint smile touched his lips. But I stayed because I discovered the woman you are. He continued quietly. I admired the healer who gave hope to strangers. I respected the leader who remained dignified after being humiliated. I fell in love with the woman who refused to surrender her freedom simply because a king stood before her. His voice grew gentler still. If fate had never existed, I believe I would have spent my life searching for someone exactly like you anyway. Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks. Not tears of sorrow, but of relief. She finally understood. Kaelin had not chosen her, because destiny demanded it. Destiny had introduced them. Love had made him remain. She smiled through her tears. Then, with calm certainty, she placed the moon-crown ring upon her finger. I choose you. A warm silver light surrounded them both. The ancient bond awakened fully, not with thunder or fear, but with quiet radiance. The moonstone above the hall glowed brighter than anyone had ever seen. The high priest lowered his head. The goddess has accepted her answer. Cheers erupted throughout the summit. Lycans embraced wolves. Warriors laughed. Children clapped their hands in delight. Years of suspicion between two peoples began to melt away. Across the hall, Adrian watched silently. There was sadness in his eyes, but there was no bitterness, only acceptance. Captain Rowan stepped beside him. Are you all right, Your Majesty? Adrian smiled faintly. I finally understand. What? The greatest act of love isn't holding on. He looked toward Evelyn and Kaelin, their hands now joined. Sometimes it's accepting that the person you failed has found the happiness they always deserved. As music filled the restored hall, two kingdoms celebrated a union unlike any before it. Not one forged by politics, not one enforced by fate alone, but one freely chosen by two hearts that had learned love could only flourish where respect, trust, and freedom walked side by side. 5 years passed beneath the united banners of the Lycan Empire and the Moon Kingdom. The borders that had once separated wolves and Lycans became roads instead of battle lines. Merchants traveled freely between kingdoms. Children attended the same schools. Healers shared knowledge that had been guarded as secrets for centuries. Queen Evelyn stood at the center of those changes. Not because she ruled with fear, but because she listened. One of her first decrees abolished forced mate ceremonies forever. No alpha, no Lycan, no elder. Not even a king or queen could command a mating bond without the willing consent of both hearts. The law became known as the Covenant of Choice. Young wolves celebrated it. Parents embraced it. Even those who once resisted slowly admitted the kingdom had become stronger because love was no longer treated as an obligation. Evelyn's second great achievement united the healing academies. Ancient Lycan medicine merged with werewolf traditions. Students from every pack studied together. No one asked where a healer had been born, only whom they could help. The mortality rate across both kingdoms fell dramatically. Entire villages that had once feared winter now welcomed it with confidence. Kaelin ruled exactly as he had promised, never ahead of Evelyn, always beside her. During council meetings, 2 thrones stood upon the dais. Neither was higher than the other. When ambassadors addressed the crown, they spoke to both rulers equally. If disagreements arose, Kaelin often smiled before saying, "What does my queen think?" And he listened to her answer. Their partnership became legendary. Future rulers traveled from distant kingdoms simply to observe how they governed together. Many expected to witness extraordinary speeches or displays of royal authority. Instead, they found something much simpler: a king and queen who respected one another. Who listened? Who admitted mistakes? Who remembered names? Who walked through villages without ceremony? One afternoon, a young princess asked Evelyn, "Your Majesty, what is the greatest treasure the moon crown gave you?" Many expected her to mention the throne or the ancient royal bloodline. Instead, Evelyn looked across the academy gardens, where Lycan and wolf children played together. "The greatest gift wasn't reclaiming my birthright," she smiled gently. "It was helping create a future where no one must choose between duty and love." The princess considered those words carefully. "I hope I rule like that one day." "You will," Evelyn replied, "if you remember that crowns exist to serve people, not the other way around." As evening settled over the United Kingdoms, Evelyn and Kaelin stood upon the palace balcony. Below them, markets bustled with life. Laughter drifted through the streets. The scars of old wars had not disappeared, but they no longer defined the future. Years earlier, Evelyn had walked into the Moon Temple, believing she had lost everything. Now she understood. The rejection that had shattered her heart had opened the path to something greater than a crown. Together, she and Kaelin had united two worlds, not by conquest, but by trust, compassion, and the simple courage to let love remain a choice. 40 years passed beneath peaceful moons. The United Kingdoms flourished beyond anything the old rulers had imagined. The border between wolves and Lycans no longer existed as a place of suspicion. It became known simply as the path of unity. Trade flowed freely. Healing academies welcomed every student. The covenant of choice remained the most cherished law in both kingdoms. No mate bond could ever again be forced. No throne could overrule a willing heart. Queen Evelyn and King Kaelin ruled side by side until their final years. Neither sought glory. They measured success by quieter things. A village that no longer knew hunger. A child who could read. A healer who saved a stranger. When they eventually entrusted the crown to the next generation, they left behind more than prosperous kingdoms. They left behind a new understanding of love. Every future Alpha, Lycan king and queen, began their reign with a pilgrimage to the Hall of Kings. At the center of the hall stood the united royal crest of the Moon Crown dynasty. Beneath it, engraved in polished silver, was one simple word: mine. Young rulers often frowned when they first saw it. "It sounds possessive," one prince admitted. The royal historian smiled. "Read the rest." Below the single word was Queen Evelyn's inscription. "Love is not the right to possess another soul. It is the privilege of being chosen by one." Beside it was King Kaelin's own message. "The greatest victory of my life was never winning a war. It was hearing the woman I loved choose me freely." Every visitor stood in thoughtful silence after reading those words. One spring morning, a little girl touring the hall with her grandmother tugged gently on her sleeve. "Grandmother," she whispered, "why did the king say mine if he didn't want to own her?" The elderly woman smiled kindly. He wasn't claiming her. He was recognizing the person his heart had found. The child looked confused. Then why didn't he just take her? "Because love that is taken isn't love. It's only possession." The little girl turned back toward the silver inscription. "So Queen Evelyn became his because she wanted to?" Her grandmother nodded. "And King Kaelin became hers for exactly the same reason." The little girl smiled brightly. "Then they chose each other every day." They did. Outside, sunlight poured across the palace gardens, where wolves and Lycans laughed together, without remembering the wars that had once divided them. History never forgot the day Alpha King Adrian publicly rejected his mate before the moon altar. But it celebrated something far greater. The moment the legendary Lycan king walked through the temple doors and spoke a single word, not as a command, not as a claim of ownership, but as the beginning of a promise that would only become real when the woman before him smiled, took his hand, and answered with the greatest gift love can ever receive. I choose you.